Hi, my name's Janelle, and in this series I'm going to be showing you how to go from knowing absolutely zero about sewing to being able to make your own wardrobe. I don't use big words or overcomplicate things. I just plan on showing you what I've learnt over a decade of making my own clothes and share all the tips and tricks I've learnt along the way to make sewing a whole lot easier. When you first sit down at a sewing machine as a complete beginner, it can be pretty overwhelming to say the least. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to use a sewing machine and what to actually look for when purchasing one. Let me start by giving you a tour of my sewing machine. Whether you're buying a new computerized sewing machine like this or starting out with an older mechanical machine, here are some of the things you'll want your sewing machine to have. Starting from the right, we have the hand wheel, which allows me to work the machine manually. We've got the thread holder, the bobbin winder, the control panel where I can change the stitch settings, the tension dial, the reverse stitch button, the presser foot, the bobbin compartment, the accessory compartment, and the foot pedal. Your machine may look slightly different to this. For example, your bobbin compartment may be on the front here instead, but all machines work in a very similar kind of way. Next, let me go through the basic stitches with you. As you can see, my sewing machine has a lot of different stitches, but the only stitches I tend to use and the stitches you will want your sewing machine to have are the straight stitch, zigzag stitch, stretch stitch, and a buttonhole stitch. However, you can make buttonholes manually without them being an inbuilt stitch option, so don't worry too much if your machine doesn't have a buttonhole option. As you can see, my machine has a whole range of lovely decorative stitches and even some embroidery stitches built in, which are nice to have, but I honestly don't find myself using them all that often. Now let me go through the different presser feet you'll need with your machine. Your sewing machine may also come with a range of different presser feet. Here are all the different feet that come with my machine, and out of these, the only ones I ever really use for making clothes are the zigzag foot, the zipper foot, and the buttonhole foot. The zigzag foot, which is also the main presser foot, is perfect for most sewing, and when I have my sewing machine set to the default stitch, I find the distance between the needle and the edge of the presser foot is about 1 centimeter or a little under half an inch, which I find is the perfect amount of seam allowance for most sewing patterns, which means I can just line the edge of the presser foot with the edge of the fabric to keep my stitching nice and straight and the seam allowance consistent. The zipper foot is a must-have when sewing zips. It's able to be positioned far left or far right depending on which side of the zip you're stitching at the time, and the design of it ensures that it won't interfere with the zipper teeth at all while you sew. The buttonhole foot is honestly, I think, the most clever presser foot there is. Simply put the button you're making the buttonhole for into this little section at the back. Lower this stabilizing arm on your sewing machine and then set your machine to a buttonhole stitch, and then your machine will automatically stitch a buttonhole that is the perfect size for your button. Now let me talk you through the bobbin winder. This here is a bobbin. Bobbins sit in this little section of your sewing machine here and are needed to construct a stitch. You usually tend to use the same coloured thread that you've thread your sewing machine with for the bobbin as well, and you can wind your thread onto the bobbin using the bobbin winder that's built into your sewing machine, and I'll show you exactly how to do this step by step in just a moment. Something else I find really useful having in a sewing machine is the option to have a free arm. By removing the accessory compartment of the base of the sewing machine will give you access to the free arm. The free arm makes it a lot easier to work on sections of the garment that are a little bit tighter and narrower, such as armholes. Now let me show you how to actually thread a sewing machine. First, you'll need to fill a bobbin with the thread you're using for your garment. Luckily, as I just showed you, your machine has a bobbin winder built in to do this part for you. Some machines use metal bobbins while others use plastic. Just use the type of bobbin that comes with your sewing machine or is specified in your instruction manual. Pass the threads through the parts as guided on your sewing machine, making sure to pass the thread through the bobbin winding guide. Here's what that looks like for my sewing machine. Then pass the thread into your bobbin and then put your bobbin onto the bobbin winder and slide the bobbin winder to the right to lock it in place. This will stop your sewing machine functioning as normal and will instead focus all of the power to threading your bobbin. Then while holding the end of the thread, press gently onto your foot pedal and the machine will begin to wind the thread directly onto the bobbin. Wind the thread around the bobbin a few times, then trim the excess thread away and continue winding the bobbin until it's full. The bobbin will stop winding automatically once it's full. Cut your bobbin loose from the thread and then open up your bobbin compartment and place your bobbin inside, making sure the thread comes out the direction showed by the arrow on your machine. Then pass the thread through this little slit here at the side. Now it's time to thread the upper part of the machine. Follow the steps marked out on your sewing machine and be careful not to skip anything, as otherwise your sewing machine will not be thread properly and it will therefore not stitch properly. Again, your sewing machine will most likely look a little bit different to mine, as every machine is different, but here is how I thread my machine. Once thread through the needle, hold on to the end of the thread and use the hand wheel to lower the needle into the bobbin compartment, which should pick up the bobbin thread easily. Then pull on the thread you're holding to draw up the bobbin thread, and then pull about 10 centimeters or 4 inches of excess thread and place it towards the back of the machine. Then put the bobbin cover back in place and your machine is ready to start sewing with. Now let me show you how to actually start sewing with a sewing machine. Before you start sewing, you will want to make sure your tension is correct. For most machines, the tension should be set around 4 for normal stitching. You will also want to make sure you have selected the correct stitch you want to sew with. For normal straight stitching, usually the stitch length will be set to around 2.5 or approximately 8 to 10 stitches per inch. To start sewing, place your fabric in between the presser foot and the machine, then place the presser foot down, hold on to the loose threads at the back of the machine, and start pressing down on the foot pedal to start stitching. It's always good practice to do a few reverse stitches at the start and end of the stitching, as this will help prevent the stitches from coming undone. It's also a good idea to hold on to the threads as you start sewing, as they can knot up otherwise. When you get to an edge or a corner that you need to turn around at, simply lift your foot off the foot pedal to stop sewing, use the hand wheel to place the needle back into your fabric, raise the presser foot, and then turn the fabric around. Then lower the presser foot back into place and continue stitching. Like I mentioned, you can use the edge of the presser foot as a guide to keep your stitching nice and straight, or you can also use the needle plate on your sewing machine as a guide. Just simply line up your fabric along any of the lines that are marked on the needle plate. I recommend using some scrap fabric to practice stitching on, or alternatively, I have made a free stitching practice sheet that you can print out onto some paper and practice by stitching along the lines. Stitching directly onto paper is perfectly fine for your sewing machine, by the way. The zigzag stitch works pretty much the same as normal stitching, but you will need to decrease the stitch length to 1.4 and make the zigzag 3.5. Or you could simply just select the zigzag stitch from your machine's inbuilt stitches. Lastly, let me share what you need to look for when buying a sewing machine. Sewing machines are quite a pricey investment. They can start at around $100 and go anywhere up to $10,000. I used to work in a fabric and sewing machine store, and when advising customers on what to buy, here is the advice I gave. A 100 AUD or 75 USD sewing machine is fine, but if you're really wanting to get started with sewing, you're going to want to upgrade it pretty quickly. If you are able to spend around the $500 mark or 350 USD dollar mark, you are going to get a really good machine that will last you decades. And personally, all of the machines I've been using have been around the $500 mark. Like I mentioned, you only need 4 stitches for making clothes: straight stitch, zigzag stitch, stretch stitch, and a buttonhole stitch. And most machines should have all of these built in. The more decorative stitches are honestly just nice to have. Another nice to have that I think is very much worth it though, especially if you're a beginner, is speed control. This little dial here allows you to slow the speed of your sewing machine right down and then speed it up as you become more confident. I find it super helpful to slow my machine down, especially when sewing things like zips, and then speed it up when I'm doing just normal straight stitching. The last thing to really think about is the amount of space at the middle of the sewing machine. For making clothes, you don't need a huge amount of space. However, if you're wanting to get into making quilts, then you're going to want a machine with a good amount of space in the middle to give your bulky quilts enough room to be sewn. I know this video has been super info heavy, so thank you for watching until the end. Hopefully you now have a much better understanding on how to use a sewing machine and what to actually look for when purchasing one. If you did enjoy this video, it would mean a lot to me if you could give it a like, and make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on the next Sewing for Beginners episode. Have a lovely day and thanks for watching.